freedom of speech and thought to all Americans, and that certainly includes the rights of parents over their children's education. When did it become the role of the government to decide what children should be taught without informing their parents? The vilification of concerned parents by this administration is a gross assault by the federal government and one that aims to bolster identity politics at the expense of the interests and the goals of parents in simply raising their families. Recognizing that the family is the most important and sacred institution in any society, the U.S. Supreme Court has held for more than a century that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects a parent's fundamental right to, quote, make decisions as to the care, custody, and control of their own children, unquote. The First Amendment also protects a parent's right to speak and advocate for their children. But that right has been significantly stifled over the past few years because the leftists have decided they apparently know better than parents do. That is an outrage, and the American people are rising up to say that they will no longer tolerate it. As the radical leftists push this woke agenda on America's children, parents across the nation began to speak up. They went to their local school board meetings and they spoke out. They shared their views on issues like critical race theory and mask mandates and school closures and controversial curricula. As more people spoke out, the NSBA, the National School Board Association, colluded with the Biden administration, and we use that term intentionally because that's how it's described. They colluded with the administration to intimidate these parents into silence by seeking federal law enforcement on them. These are just a few of the facts. In summary, on September 29, 2021, the NSBA sent a letter to President Biden, and in the letter, they equated concerned parents voicing their opinion at school board meetings with domestic terrorists. They urged the Biden administration to use the Patriot Act against them. They used the federal statutory authorities against them. On October 4th, just 5 days after the NSBA sent its letter, Attorney General Merrick Garland issued a memorandum that directed the FBI and U.S. attorneys' offices to address a purported, quote, disturbing spike in harassment, intimidation, and threats of violence at school board meetings. The Patriot Act was passed in response to 9/11 to combat international terrorism, but this administration is now employing it to target concerned parents. Attorney General Garland did not define intimidation, harassment, and threats in his memo, and that ambiguity has had the effect, of course, of chilling protected First Amendment activity by parents and law enforcement, because they have to guess as to what speech is legally allowed now at school board meetings. It's absurd. Whistleblower testimony shows that FBI agents themselves had immediate concerns about the Attorney General's memo. One FBI whistleblower testified to our Judiciary Committee that they were, quote, stunned that the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the country would publish something like that because, quote, it was leading towards targeting parents for speaking up about their children's education, unquote, and that it would, quote, absolutely chill parents' First Amendment rights. That agent was stating the obvious. But the Biden administration's DOJ went even further than that. On October 20th, the FBI's Assistant Director of the Counterterrorism Division and the Assistant Director for the Criminal Division sent an email notifying FBI personnel about a new EDU officials threat tag that they created to apply to school board investigations. Another FBI whistleblower told our committee that the memo and the creation of the threat tag suggested, quote, that the demand for terrorism vastly outstrips the supply. So we're going to try to expand out as much as we can in order to meet the metrics that we have in order to show that we're a successful agency, unquote. Wow. Committee of Republicans have repeatedly called on Attorney General Garland to rescind that ill-conceived memo, especially after the NSBA issued a retraction and apology for its letter. On February 23rd of this year, Chairman Jordan had to subpoena the Justice Department, the FBI, and the Education Department for documents necessary to complete our oversight on this issue. They've resisted that. To date, we only have 14 pages turned over by the FBI. But from information obtained through the subpoenas, it is clear that the Biden administration has misused federal law enforcement and counterterrorism resources for political purposes. Still, the Attorney General's memo is standing out there. He will not rescind it. The Biden administration's goal is clearly to silence the critics of its radical education policies. Obviously, some Democrats today want to silence parents who disagree with their woke agenda to indoctrinate American children with controversial and inappropriate curricula. If you think I am engaging in hyperbole, you need to stay tuned for this hearing. The radical left has infiltrated nearly every institution in this country, and our education system is one of the most glaring examples. Just imagine, just for a moment, if a Republican president designated an entire group of Americans as terrorists simply because they disagreed with the administration. Democrats and the media would go berserk. And yet, strangely, when the Biden administration does this, they all look the other way. But good conscience and the Constitution require us to address this with urgency. Our responsibility in these hearings and in all these investigations throughout this entire Congress is to do three things very clearly. Clearly present the undisputed facts for the American people to evaluate for themselves, and for us to use as a guide to craft legislation to reform this chaos and ensure it is never allowed to happen again. And third, to use the power of the purse that we have here in the House to ensure that federal agencies are never again allowed to abuse and use the precious treasure of taxpayers against them. The Biden administration's draconian approach to governance is a grave concern for committee Republicans, and I think all Americans. We will continue to fight to restore parental rights guaranteed in the Constitution. We look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, and I yield back. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Scanlon, for her opening statement.
Thank you. And because this is the first hearing of the Subcommittee on the Constitution in this Congress, I want to congratulate my colleague, Representative